Hello, everyone. And thank you all for joining us for the webinar this evening, Mysteries and Marvels of Mistletoe. My name is Shirali Dave, and I'm the ACT and YAS Birds on Farms Coordinator with BirdLife Australia. And before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm speaking today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I also want to acknowledge the deep and ongoing connection that First Nations people have with the country, land, water, and skies, and all living things. And we recognize and are grateful for the immense contribution of Indigenous people to the knowledge and conservation of Australia's birds. It's a pleasure to be hosting today's webinar, Mysteries and Marvels of Mistletoe. If you've had any conversations with me or our project officer, Paul, over the past few months, we've probably found a way to include a fact about mistletoe in the conversation. And we both feel really excited to have two fantastic speakers here with us today who are working at the intersection of mistletoe ecology and habitat restoration, and bird restoration using mistletoe. We have David Watson, who is an ecologist, and he spent over 20 years, I think, you can tell us if that's right later, David, I think over 20 years studying mistletoe and its relationships with woodland species. His research has helped shift the perception of mistletoe from being an unwanted parasite to a keystone species that plays a crucial role in biodiversity. We've been lucky to have David as a guest for Birds on Farms before, and today we'll be diving deeper into the benefits that mistletoe provides for woodland ecosystems. And we also have Kristy Peters. She leads the Restoring Mistletoe on Wanneroo Country project with BirdLife, which supports the critically endangered Regent Honeyeater. And she works alongside with landholders in the Hunter Valley. Kristy is actively reintroducing mistletoe into key habitats to restore essential food and shelter for woodland birds. Her work brings together science, community, and on-ground action to deliver meaningful conservation outcomes. And we're thrilled to have both of them with us today. David, before I let you kick things off, I'll just remind everyone, feel free to turn your videos on if you prefer, just keep your mics off. And please use the question and answer section, which you'll find, I think, at the top of your screen. If you have any questions throughout, we'll try to answer them during the presentations, but we also have some time set aside at the end for David and Kristy to answer the questions one by one. So don't feel shy to ask questions, as many as you can, and we'll get to them, as many of them as we can. If there are any that we don't get to, we will send out, we'll have your email addresses, I hope, and we'll send them out after the webinar is over. And yeah, I'll let you kick things off then, David.
All righty, thank you. Let's get going. Hopefully that button will work. There we go. Is that looking good? Can I get a thumbs up? Is that yes? Okay, marvelous.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Just acknowledging that I'm on Wiradjuri country, where I am up here, unceded, and a lot of the work I'll be presenting was collected on Wiradjuri country as well, with some other work in WA that I'll mention in passing. So mistletoes, oh my, let's get into it. I tend to get a bit excited when I talk about parasitic plants, and so I need to get these acknowledgements in early to make sure I include them. I'm the Muppet in front of you talking this evening, but I'm by no means the one who did everything that I'll be speaking about. I've been privileged to work with a team of many researchers, early career researchers, students, collaborators around the world, and they're listed there. Funding, a lot of it is thanks to you, your taxpayers' dollars, hard at work through the Australian Research Council and various other granting agencies, and then landholders. A lot of the work I'm presenting was conducted on private property, on farmland, in the Holbrook Landcare Network area, and I'm indebted to the Billabong Creek landholders for ongoing access to not just their land, but their wisdom about the country that they manage. So very quickly, I'm here today wearing my mistletoe hat. But I wear a few other hats in other contexts. So you might have heard of the Australian Acoustic Observatory, a large array of 360 or so acoustic monitoring stations around the country, listening 24/7 to anything that squawks or squeaks. That's one of the projects I've established. Do a lot of work in Latin America as well as within Australia, in the arid zone, in tropical forests all over the place. But mistletoe is the particular focus of this evening's chat. That central photo there with me wearing a bandana, it's a new species of mistletoe I found in the Colombian Andes a few years back. I might have borrowed a sign from New Zealand. I'll give it back at some point. I've got, yeah, it's tragic. I've got a mistletoe themed pizza oven. It's so understand that the half an hour or so that you're getting now, that's a very, very short distillation of what's a much larger portfolio of work. So this is where we're going for the next little while. I'm going to bust a few myths early on. And please don't feel bad if you think those things are true before I start busting them. Many people think so. The essence of the talk is going to be looking at diversity and how mistletoe affects diversity, looking at the patterns, digging a bit deeper through experimentation to look at the ecological processes driving those patterns, then doing a bit more work and finding out exactly what mechanisms are important in accounting for all of this. And that matters not just for intellectual curiosity, but if you're trying to do things to a system, if you're trying to restore an ecosystem, if you're trying to push it one way or the other, knowing how it works and knowing what levers you have to reach for, very powerful and makes you much better able to achieve your desired outcome. And then I'll touch on a few aspects of mistletoe management, both if there's too much of a good thing or if you want to put it back. But I've put brackets around that last point because I don't want to steal Kristy's thunder. That's her department, and there'll be much more detail there about mistletoe for restoration. So it's dinner time. And I've designed this talk as a bit of a tasting platter. So there's a bit of this, bit of that. If you're not a big fan of hummus or evolutionary ecology, look, just wait a few minutes. There'll be another tasty dish coming along. So let's get into it. Let's bust some myths. Many people think these things are facts, and they're all not true. They introduced weeds. There's blackberries, and blackbirds in England, and they brought them here. And there's mistletoe in England and Europe, and there's mistletoe here. So is it just introduced? Incorrect, people. They're native. They're found all over the world. Anywhere there's woody vegetation, pretty much, there's mistletoes, including on all sorts of islands, really isolated areas in the middle of oceans. Hawaii, the Azores, they've all got their own mistletoes. So there's about 1,600 or so, 1,500 with names. There's 97 Australian species. There's 2 undescribed ones, so we'll get to a century pretty soon, which just like cricket. I mean, we're so much better in England than cricket. It's just not funny. And same with mistletoe. We've got almost a century of mistletoes, and they've just got one lousy little one. So, sad. Now, the toxicity thing's interesting. The European mistletoe Viscum album is toxic, and that's led to people to think that mistletoes generally are poisonous. They're not. Lots and lots and lots of things eat them, including people. Indigenous communities around the world will snack on mistletoe fruit as a little tasty treat. This is this next one here, the third one. Don't they kill trees? I get a lot of questions about this, often from landholders who are really genuinely concerned about trees on their property, on the lands they manage, and are concerned that mistletoes aren't helping the situation. And look, really high density, a lot of numbers of mistletoes on one tree, that's not having a positive effect on that tree. They're taking, and not giving anything in return. And especially with water, that can be a problem if that tree is struggling with water. But generally, trees don't even know they've got mistletoe in them. It's a bit like a branch that's shaded, so it takes goodies that are produced by the rest of the tree, but it doesn't give much in return. And trees are large, long-lived, very resilient beasties, so they can handle the odd mistletoe, no problem at all. And then there's a perception that, oh no, there's a tree with mistletoe in it, so that tree must be a goner, that tree must be sick. And that's simply not the case. I've done a lot of work showing that it's actually the reverse, that trees with resources to spare, with plenty of nutrients, with plenty of water, those are the ones that are able to host a mistletoe to maturity. If the tree is struggling to pay the bills, if it's not getting quite enough water, or the fertility of the soil is not quite right, mistletoes just don't thrive, and they often die out on that tree, even if they've managed to germinate. And just if you take nothing away from my talk, just think of mistletoes as beautiful native plants. There's almost 100 species of them, found all over the country, in every habitat you can imagine, from deserts to rainforests and everything in between. And they're gorgeous. And if you want to know more, a lot of what I'm speaking about today is summarized in a book available through CSIRO Publishing. Lots of pictures, information about management, about cultural uses, about ecology, but it's also a field guide to every mistletoe in the southern half of Australia. So if this tickles your fancy, there's many more bits of information in there. Okay, so let's go through a few things. Firstly, mistletoes aren't just one thing. It's a way of being a plant. Like a mangrove is a woody plant, a tree that grows in seawater. Mistletoes are a kind of plant that does three things. They're parasitic, they're woody, and they attach to their hosts above ground on the branches, not the roots. And that way of being a plant has evolved independently 5 times. 5 times in the broad neighborhood of plants, the Sandalales, that's to do with sandalwoods and all those root parasitic groups. So the purple in that phylogeny are root parasites, and on 5 separate occasions, going way back to the as early as the Cretaceous, 5 groups of those parasites climbed from the soil up to the forest canopy and became mistletoes. And that predates birds. Mistletoes are older than birds. Mistletoes are now dispersed by birds, but birds weren't involved in that transition from root parasite to stem parasite up in the canopy. And our best guess, it happened multiple times. Once in Gondwanaland with an ancient group of marsupials, and once in Africa with a very early group of primates, a bit like bush babies. And we see today in Madagascar that dwarf lemurs and mouse lemurs are quite important mistletoe dispersers still in that system. So birds are the dominant disperser. Some mammals have a role in some systems, but they were certainly the most important disperser. And they invented mistletoes. They planted the first mistletoe seeds way back. But we're going to talk about ecology and the role that these plants play, especially in farmland. Now, there's an idea out there about keystones. You hear things talking. People talk about such and such an organism as that's a keystone. It's a keystone species. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that it refers to a key, like a freestanding arch, and the stone at the very top is different to all the other ones. It's got sloping sides on both sides. That's the keystone shape, and it's designed in such a way that with no mortar, with no glue, no adhesives at all, just through the distribution of forces, it ties the whole arch together. And so that same rationale is applied to some species where, in the Daintree rainforest of Cape York, there might be 200, 300 different kinds of birds. but there's only one big enough to disperse the really large seeded rainforest trees. That's the cassowary. It's got a big mouth, it's got a big bum, seeds can pass through it, deposited in a little package of goodies. Take that one bird away, and there's nothing dispersing those large seeded trees. The forest becomes much more simple over time as those trees die out, and lots of things lose the habitat, the resources, the food they need. So it's just one of hundreds of birds, but it's a pretty important one that's more important than you'd expect just by numbers. So that's literally a textbook example of what a keystone is. And there's an idea that mistletoe acts as an ecological keystone. And I wanted to test that idea, and I did it just up the road from where I am here, in Holbrook, just north of Albury. And those little red dots on your screen there, those are 40 little fragments of box gum grassy woodland on private land, and we removed mistletoe from 20 of those, so from half of them. So with a cherry picker, getting up there, there's the mistletoe up nice and high, and just with a handsaw, with a pruning saw, up, off it goes. And so we did that many times. And before we did that, we had a full year of surveys to see what was in those patches of woodland. The only thing we did was remove mistletoe from half of them. We left it for a few years, and then we came back and said, okay, has there been a change? If mistletoe is such an important thingy, how have the birds responded when you take it away? And they responded drastically, far more dramatically, I must say, than I was expecting. We lost a third of our birds in 3 years, species I'm talking about, not just a few less babblers, no babblers. They just went away. So we lost a third of our birds just by removing mistletoe from the woodland canopies. There's ways of sort of working out how important is a particular organism, and it's called a keystone index. Basically, it looks at the function of how the effect on diversity as a function of its biomass, how prominent an organism it is in the system. And mistletoe is a very minor component in the biomass of a woodland. Think of grasses, think of trees. Mistletoe is a tiny little contributor to the weight of all things, and yet it has this disproportionately huge role. And it's so far the species with the highest keystone index ever measured. So when we did that experiment and published those findings, the media went bananas on this. It was a cool story. It's like, wow, this freaky plant, take it away, birds go bye-bye. Fascinating. So lots of headlines. My mum was very happy with seeing her little son in the media. Isn't that great? But I was still curious, because when I looked in more depth at the data, it got to a point that I no longer understood what was going on. So let me just walk you through these graphs. The graph on the left-hand side with the shrike tit there, that's the overall finding of the study. The red dots are the control sites, woodlands. We removed a bunch of branches from a bunch of trees. We left the mistletoes alone. The blue dots are those treatment sites where we removed every single mistletoe from the woodland, and within 3 years we lost a third of our birds. Now, so that's this overall effect here. Now, most of that effect at the community scale, that's including wood duck and ibis and all the sorts of things you'd find in a woodland that's in a farming area. So it's not just bush birds. If you just looked at insectivores, huge difference there, and take insectivores away and look at everything else, there was no effect of mistletoe removal. So what we were seeing at the community scale was a particular response of one group of birds, insect eaters, and specifically those insect eaters that do their insect eating on the ground. Now, that had me flummoxed for quite a while, because everything we were doing was up in the canopy, and yet the birds that were most responding to this didn't spend any time in the canopy. They were scooching around on the forest floor. So it made me think that, look, there's something going on here. Maybe it's to do with insects, maybe it's to do with leaf litter. There's a connection here to do with these ground foraging insectivores. And we've got another word for these ground foraging insectivores that you'd all be familiar with. We call them declining woodland birds. They're not doing too well. Their ranges are retreating inland. Their numbers are declining. And most of them are ground foraging insectivores. So could it be that what this experiment was revealing was a mechanism that was actually telling us why declining woodland birds were in such trouble when other groups in the same woodland, nectar feeders, other groups, seem to be doing just fine. So we needed to, instead of thinking about things from the bird's point of view, we needed to think about things from the insect's point of view, and dive into this system with a new perspective. So more experimentation, lots of detail in here. Just read the paper. It'll put you right to sleep. It's guaranteed to work. We did a whole bunch of experimentation with bags of litter. And we looked at under trees with mistletoe, under trees without mistletoe. We made our own litter bags and looked at how that affected arthropods. And the bottom line of it is, add mistletoe to the canopy of a woodland, and you're getting around 2.5 million more insects per hectare per year. Now I was talking about levers at the start. That's a big lever. If you're worried about woodland birds in your area, you've just found out that there's this make more bugs button. And if you push that button, you get more insects for just those organisms that you're worried about. More food, happier babblers, happier robins. So that was an amazing finding that's since been replicated by other work in other systems around the world. Mistletoe seems to have this effect on insects on the forest floor. But how? That took a lot more work to find out. But it goes well beyond just mistletoes and gets to the very basis of woodland food webs. And that's to do with soil, that's to do with position in the landscape, it's to do with litter as well. And that led to quite a compelling explanation for why particular birds in particular landscapes have gone through the steepest declines, both in Australia, but also around the world, where we see temperate woodlands in real trouble. And it's litter. Litter is that mechanism, is that pathway that we didn't know about when we started the experiment. Mistletoes drop their leaves at a much higher rate than eucalypts. Eucalypts are misers. They worked hard to get all those nutrients. They defend them with nasty oils, and they hang on to their leaves for years. Mistletoes did not work hard for those nutrients. They just took them. They stole them from the tree. And so they churn through their leaves really rapidly, and those leaves are full of nutrients. So just one mistletoe up in the canopy of a tree will have more phosphorus just in the tissues of that living mistletoe than in the entire tree above and below ground. So when you add a mistletoe to a tree, you're releasing the nutrients that are bound up in that tree. They're concentrated by the mistletoe, dropped by the mistletoe, and then taken up again by the tree because the feeding roots are right there. But you've got that window of availability that completely changes the soil microbial dynamics. Decomposition rates change, rates of carbon sequestration change, rates of fungal activity change. That's all the stuff that detritivores eat, insects eat, and that's the whole basis of the pattern we were seeing was litter. And don't think about this as just adding a little bit more goodies across the landscape. This is in patches. Mistletoes, as you would know, as you're driving down the road, you won't see many mistletoes. Then there'll be that one little spot where there's heaps of mistletoes, at variety of scales, at a regional scale, at a forest stand scale, in the scale of an individual plant. You've got patchiness, and where there's lots of mistletoe, there's lots of litter, there's lots of nutrients. There'll be different sorts of microbial communities, different sorts of plants, different sorts of insects that will live there that need those conditions. That 1 meter further away, they can't live there because there's not nearly enough, potassium in the soil or whatever it is. So think about them as driving up heterogeneity in nutrients in the soil. That's what, not just mistletoes, but parasitic plants generally, we now know that's an attribute of what they do. So just to finish up on this little section here, what does this mean? What does this mean for you? You might have a little property, you might have a massive property. Think about it from a nutrients point of view. I'm sensitive about language here because, when I talk about structural complexity, more branches, more leaves on the ground, someone else would look at that and say, well, that's just waiting for for a hot northerly wind, and the whole property is going to go up. So there's lots of compromises to be had in this space. But I'm just explaining from an ecological point of view in our woodlands, mistletoes are a really good thing. Litter is an important part of that mechanism. There's many other plants that contribute disproportionately to high quality litter, therefore soil health, therefore insects, therefore insectivore food. And they're not often used in plantings. So, yes, you put your gum trees in, make sure you put some nitrogen fixers in as well, your casuarinas and acacias. And I'm talking about birds here. We're bird people. But it's not just about birds. There's many other insectivores out there that thrive from these same mechanisms. So just want to dive into a few more interactions. So we've spoken about broader diversity. We've spoken about leaf litter. What about nectar? So if we look at the pictures here, you can see in the top corner there, mistletoes have gorgeous flowers. They rely on birds to pollinate their flowers. And together with Ross Crates and the team, the Difficult Bird Group at ANU, we did a large-scale study across southeastern Australia, thousands of sites, to look at nectar-feeding birds and the nectar that they were feeding on to try and find out which are the more important nectar sources and how are those nectar sources affected by changing climates. Long, complicated story, but what we basically found is that mistletoe is by far the most reliable source of nectar in these woodlands. And again, it's because it's parasitic. They can flower whenever they want to flower. And if they want to put more nectar in their flowers to make them more attractive, well, they can do that. Whereas a tree that's struggling, that's sitting there on a rocky hill, it's been a bit dry, hasn't rained for a while, it can probably just get enough resources to flower, but it doesn't have enough resources to invest in nectar. And so the nectar feeders go elsewhere. Mistletoe doesn't have nearly those constraints. They've got a much longer flowering season, a much more reliable flowering season, and quite a high concentration of carbohydrates in their nectar. So we found that mistletoes are really important for nectar feeding birds, but paradoxically, because they've got such a high need for, they need water, always need water. And if a tree is struggling, mistletoes die. So during droughts, mistletoes are the most reliable source of nectar, but during a really severe drought, especially with a heat wave, especially with high nighttime temperatures, mistletoes curl up their toes and die. So we're in a really tricky situation now where many of our woodland communities need birds for pollination, to pollinate them, to recruit, but they're running out of nectar feeders and pollinators because of these climate induced changes. So yeah, and that's again that's an Australian story here. There's parallel work I'm doing with colleagues in Patagonia finding exactly the same thing in mistletoes in that part of the world. Now, you might have too much of a good thing. This might be your place. This might be a big old tree in your paddock, and you're worried about that tree. It's a special tree to you. It's shade for your stock. It's an important part of your place. That is a problem. First to admit that. That's too much of a good thing right there. You can go in and cut out every mistletoe in there. There's no magic spray, so you need to do it by pruning. But that's not actually the issue. The reason there's so many mistletoes in that tree is because all the factors that would normally keep it in check aren't operating. And in most parts of southern Australia, certainly in the box gum grassy woodlands where we're talking about, fire and possums are the two most important mechanisms in keeping mistletoe numbers down. Mistletoe has no defenses against fire whatsoever. Fire comes through an area, mistletoes are all dead. And possums are quite hungry, canopy-dwelling herbivores. They go out of their way to eat mistletoe. It's one of their favourite foods. Unlike gum leaves, it's not defended with chemicals. It's full of water, it's full of nutrients. And there's other smaller herbivores that are in some places just as important as possums. Many insects will only lay their eggs on mistletoes. The only thing those insects will eat is mistletoe, especially butterflies. So those factors, if you're worried about too much mistletoe in your place, think about fire, think about possums, think about butterflies. And if you're adding nest boxes, adding understory shrubs that provide a nectar source for butterflies, and sort of fencing out areas beneath those trees to give those nutrients somewhere to go and other things to mop them up, then you'll start to see things change and mistletoe will start to thin out. It's a very short-lived plant compared to the tree, so it doesn't take much tweaking to push the balance away from too many mistletoes and towards a happy, healthy, long-lived tree, which is what we all want. But what about the reverse situation? And again, I'll keep this brief because this is Kristy's main event here. But we did some studies in urban areas where there's lots of trees, but very few mistletoes. And Tim Flannery has a particular hatred for plane trees. In his 2010 book, he pointed out that for Australian fauna, plane trees are so useless for native wildlife, they might as well be made of concrete. And he's got a standing bet at his local pub that if somebody brings in a plane tree leaf with signs of herbivory, he'll shout the bar for free drinks all around. There's just nothing eats it. And so we took that on as a challenge and said, okay, we can make plane trees more palatable to Australian wildlife, just add mistletoe. So we did. Lots of plane trees in Melbourne. The pink there is plane trees. There's a lot of plane trees in downtown Melbourne. So together with Rodney Vandery and Lee Harrison at City of Melbourne, we had this wonderful program using creeping mistletoe, Mularina, and we put it up in trees. Carefully monitored them, used cherry pickers to get up there and wipe them on the branches. Gardening Australia did a whole spiel on it, and it worked. We had babies. It took a long time for them to sprout. Mularina, creeping mistletoe, is a very slow and steady grower. They don't do anything rapidly, so it took quite a while. But this is the environment. So this is the lovely study site pictures of suburban Melbourne with a row of concrete trees. And there we go. There's one of our little babies sprouting, and there's some more. I live tweeted the whole fieldwork experience, so to bring people along the journey with me. And even better, we found some with fruit. So not only had we put mistletoe back into the canopies of an urban woodland, but we'd got it to the point where they were then self-replicating, that they were flowering, those flowers were being fertilized, and those seeds were then maturing in those fleshy fruits to then inoculate the next set of trees. So that's inspired some other work on mistletoe reintroduction in cities as well as in urban areas. Just finally wrapping up, there's ongoing work in my group looking at microclimate, at the effect of mistletoes on within canopy temperatures. There's a boobook owl on a 45-degree day on the lower Murrumbidgee in a big old acacia full of mistletoe. Much cooler in a mistletoe than in any other part of the tree. The stomata in mistletoe leaves are always open. They're always evapotranspiring, and it has a measurable effect on temperature. We looked at that in some field work in Western Australia. This is on Badimaya, Nanda, and Madu country, putting little measurements, little loggers in trees. This wasn't mistletoes, this was Santalacea, but like mistletoes, but just attached to the ground. So quandongs, sandalwoods, and native cherries, consistently cooler inside the parasitic plants than the non-parasites, again, driven by that continuous evapotranspiration. Hot, dry landscape, and if you look at the maximum temperatures in trees, much, much lower temperatures in the Santalacea, about 5 degrees. Which is right at the thermal limit of many of these desert creatures. So something as trivial as a quandong or a few mistletoes in the landscape can allow things to persist during heat waves. And you can see there the temperatures in some of those shots. The emus, it was 47 degrees, and the only place the emus were hanging out was underneath big old quandongs. And lizards did the same thing. You can see their bodies lined up in the shadows of the parasitic plants on a 54-degree day. There's a parenti hanging out in the shade. Clever critters. So, wrapping up now, what have we learned, class? We've learned a few things. We've learned that mistletoe, it's not a terrible parasite that kills trees. It's a special thing. It's a native plant. It's a source of enriched litter, heaps of tasty nectar. They provide cool spots in warming canopies and boost resource availability both in the bush and in cities. And if you pay attention to the next talk, you'll learn how to grow your own, so you can have a little bit of this in your own backyard or on your own property. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
David, there are a few questions in the Q&A which have been directed to you. So if you don't mind, like maybe typing some answers in there, or we can, or just having a look and we can come to them at the end during the Q&A time.
In the chat, or how do
In
I
the
get
Q&A up the top. It should be up the top, the bar at the top of your screen.
No, but that's okay.
Oh, can you see the chat?
I can see the chat.
Oh, we can post them all in the chat.
Okay, so
I'll copy them
what could
all.
remove mistletoe? From Carla. I've heard possums can deplete them. I've just spoken about that. So yes. So what removes mistletoe? Many herbivores. So if they're low, livestock, all sorts of things will eat mistletoe, even wallabies. But up in a canopy, you're looking at arboreal marsupials, so especially brush-tailed possums. They love it. Not so much ringtails or gliders, and butterflies. There's quite a diversity of butterflies in Australia. The Jezebels, the azures, the sapphires. All they eat is mistletoe, and some of them are actually specific to the genus. Like they'll only lay their eggs on mistletoes of one particular genus. That's all the larvae will eat. And some of those larger butterflies, like a spotted Jezebel or a black Jezebel, those caterpillars are, the size of a gherkin, and they can defoliate a mistletoe, quite a large mistletoe, in the course of as they mature. What else have we got? Bracken contributes to litter. Oh, bracken's an interesting one. So bracken is very, very high in tannin, and tannin is a digestibility inhibitor. So when there's bracken around, a bit like some acacias, it actually slows decomposition of woody tissues. So I'm not up on experimentation of bracken worldwide, so I'd have to do some homework on that. But no, mistletoes are very digestible. They're not defended. They've got no nasties in them. So it's quite a different, a very high nutrient, poorly defended resource. What mammals feed on mistletoes and nectar, as well as possums, gliders, fruit bats? Okay, surprisingly, no. In Australia, there's almost no examples of bats, of fruit bats, or blossom bats interacting with mistletoes at all. There's some work in other parts of the world. So I mentioned lemurs in Madagascar. There's some nectar-feeding bats in the genus Corolia in Central and South America that might be important. There's one mistletoe that we know of that's a night-flowering mistletoe recently described in Brazil that appears to rely on bats as pollinators, but that's a bit of a weirdo. Mistletoes as a group are primarily pollinated by birds. And the only place where mistletoes are really important for mammals is in the Andes and in Madagascar. So not here. Now, what would be the classification and to include all mistletoes in Australia? Great. A taxonomic question. There's 5 families of things we call mistletoes. 3 of those families are in Australia. There's the Laurantheaceae. That's the showy mistletoes, the bright flowers. There's the Viscaceae. That's the same family that has Viscum album, the European mistletoe. So we've got a few of those. And not just in the genus Viscum, we've got a few other genera as well. So Nothothixus, the one that you get in Currajong, that's in the Viscaceae. And then there's this freaky plant, Rhinwatia, that's in the Santalaceae. So the same family as Quandongs and cherry ballards. And that's a twining mistletoe, just one species from that group, and that's in the top end. That's just in Northern Australia. So of the 5, we've got 4 of them. The other 2, one's just on Nothofagus forests in Patagonia. The other one's a freaky Asian thing that also snuck into South America relatively recently. Why do you think negative thinking? Okay, Andrew, thank you. I think the reason why mistletoes have so much bad press, it's because of the P word. They're parasites. People get all funny about parasites. You can't take your kids to school if they've got parasites. If your dogs have parasites, you've got to give them special pills. We now know that parasites, they're not good, they're not bad, they're like predators. They're just a way of being, a way of consuming. It's a non-destructive consumer. And the food web scientists have been telling us for years that parasites are really important in terms of food web stability. And in many systems, parasites are actually more diverse than all other groups of organisms combined. So I think the reason why mistletoes need a bit more love is because of those parasitic connotations. Now, something about ecosystem health in Tasmania where there are no mistletoes. Great. These are informed questions. Bravo. Yes, there is no mistletoe in Tasmania. Now, there used to be. So mistletoe's got very distinctive pollen, it's like the wool mark, like a sort of a pyramid, a curvy pyramid. And in the Midlands, there's some lakes, and those lakes have very still sediment at the base of them that traps whatever pollen was floating around in the world at that time. And so very clever palynologists have extracted cores from that mud, and they've sorted through, they've worked out which is which. And 250,000 years ago, there was mistletoe in Tasmania. So while it was still connected to mainland Australia, but there's no mistletoe in Tassie. There hasn't been for quite a while. We don't know exactly when it snuffed out. What that means for forest health in Tasmania, I think it's a pretty minor component in those cooler forests where you've got much more reliable rainfall. So I think you only see the really pronounced effects of parasitic plants on ecosystems in poorer soils and where there's more fluctuating resource availability. And mistletoes are that reliable source of goodies, good years, bad years, winters and summers. I wouldn't have expected a big change there when mistletoes went away. And I think the reason why they went away from Tasmania is the same reason why thylacines persisted there for the longest, is because of that reliability, that high fertility soils supporting large populations of tasty, tasty prey if you're a thylacine, or hungry, hungry herbivores if you're a mistletoe. So it's all about that population base of leaf eaters. Jackie, didn't see any reference to mistletoes being great for bird nesting. Oh, I've only got 20 minutes. I've written so many papers about birds nesting in mistletoe, I couldn't include it all. Yes, about 3/4 of all birds that nest in trees, in foliage in Australia have been recorded nesting in mistletoes. Some, like little eagles, like spotted harriers, like well, those are two great examples. They pretty much only nest in mistletoes. And a lot of smaller birds as well will preferentially put their nests in mistletoes. We did work on diamond firetails that do this. And the reason appears to be partly structural. You've got all these branches, and if you're a little bird, that's heaps of attachment points. If you're a big bird, it's a nice sort of secure platform to stick your nest on top of. And we see this worldwide, especially in Africa. Heaps of things nest in mistletoes, and there's a chemical angle to this as well, because raptors in Africa will preferentially line their nest daily with fresh mistletoe leaves, and it's probably because it's got antimicrobial compounds in it that stops their chicks getting all festy in the nest. I think I've just got through the questions.
Good. I'm going to see if I can share my content. Let's just have a look here. There we go. Okay, everybody seeing that?
Yep.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I just couldn't see anyone there for a second. All right, I'm just going to put it into presentation mode. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here tonight. I'm so glad to be here to talk about a project that has been my passion project for about the last 5 years. I've been working with BirdLife Australia as a woodland birds project coordinator now since 2019. And yeah, personally, when I joined the team, I knew that a key focus for where I work here in the Hunter Valley on Wanneroo country, for where we do the project work, was going to be regent honeyeater ecology and working on the release of zoo-bred birds that we do and the monitoring there, and also working with the local Aboriginal community through Minderibba Local Aboriginal Land Council. So I was excited to get to start working on this amazing bird, one of our most endangered honeyeaters in Australia. But what sort of quickly became obvious is that my focus was going to quickly switch to plants. And I didn't know a whole heap about mistletoe when I first started. So it was great to, have actually read a lot of Dave Watson's papers about woodland bird occupancy and detectability, and having that background with him, knowing all of the work that he had done on mistletoe, but then bringing the two together and realising that I was going to be starting to coordinate a project that was bringing those two elements together. And yeah, it's been a fascinating journey these last sort of 6 years for me, learning so much from people like Dave and a whole heap of other researchers, which I will do the same sort of thing as Dave. And before I get headlong into the material, just acknowledge some of the researchers and collaborators. So as I said, acknowledging that we have had this fantastic partnership project with the Minderibba Local Aboriginal Land Council. Their CEO, Tara Deva, has always been really welcoming to us in terms of being able to share their land, to allow us to walk on their lands with them, learn from each other, and work on various projects that support regent honeyeater recovery, both from, as I said, monitoring of wild birds, releases of the zoo birds from Taronga Zoo, and also now this mistletoe project that's aiming to restore habitat that's been lost from a lot of successive fires and the bad drought that we came out of through 2020-21. So we've collaborated, as I said, with CSU, ANU. We've also had some amazing mistletoe propagators and enthusiasts out there. Peter Vaughan, that is local to the Hunter Valley, Geo Fitzpatrick, that is based down in Melbourne and also has some really great online content about mistletoe propagation from more a Victorian perspective, and then colleagues that I've worked with from BirdLife and New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service. And then I can't forget that we've also had our arborists, an amazing team of passionate arborists that, rather than wanting to cut down trees, are working with us to look at how we can better promote mistletoe as being the amazing species, or many species that it is, and trying to help educate landholders, local councils, all of those sorts of land managers, that mistletoes really are worth conserving, and how can we manage tree health to still keep that amazing resource in the environment. And we have had lots of taxpayer-funded, funding through the New South Wales Environmental Trust, and some federal funding back after the Black Summer fires through the National Land Care Program. So just acknowledging that that's made this work possible. So I thought first I'll just tell you a bit more about the project that we've worked on, what the achievements have been of that project, and then I'll get into, more of the in-depth stuff about how do you actually pick and plant mistletoe, what are our tips and tricks that we've learnt along the process of doing this, and give you some resources at the end so that you can hopefully take some action yourself and look in your local area for, whether it's in your backyard or if you're part of a local land care group, or can influence your local councils maybe to look at keeping mistletoe in local environments or adding it back where it may have been lost. So just to acknowledge here, as I've said, this is just some photos from one of the project's key deliverables in the early days, which was just bringing together the project partners on their Wanneroo country there in the Lower Hunter Valley. So this site, for people who don't know the Hunter Valley, we're looking at about sort of 2 hours northwest of Sydney, just still, on the eastern side of the Great Dividing Range. But if anyone's sort of familiar with the Hunter Valley, it's in a unique position where it's quite a broad valley and it's open to the west. So we actually get a lot of western influence for woodland birds that come into the valley. So this patch of bushland that we were working on It's a key biodiversity area. It's called the Cessnock Woodlands KBA, and we have been doing a lot of research. We've known how special this place is, and obviously Minderibba have known how special it is for a lot longer than us, but we've been aware of Regent Honeyeaters regularly coming back to breed and to forage in this woodland for around 15 to 20 years now. So we wanted to bring all the local community together, local bird clubs, landholders that live nearby, Wanneroo elders that have actually grown up as kids running around in this bushland, local land services, land care, everyone that we thought would be best to meet, get to know each other and kick this project off. So that was a fantastic day. We just all sat around and shared our stories of who we are, where we were coming from and what we aim to achieve, and just sort of shared our experiences about the mistletoe on this land and on the areas where it had been lost. So I'm just going to show you now. So this is, as I said, the other way it's known as also the Tamalpin woodland. So we're talking about this large patch of woodland on the valley floor, surrounded by the towns of Cessnock and Curry. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar too that the lower and the upper Hunter Valley has been a heavily developed area for coal mining, for residential and commercial development, of course, as well as a lot of agricultural development. And so the fact that we still actually have this large, fairly intact piece of woodland that is generally a dry sort of spotted gum ironbark woodland with a bit of grey gum, stringy bark type in there. And there's also some curry sand swamp woodland, which is a very unique endangered ecological community. So we've got a whole heap of endangered communities, threatened plant species. This woodland supports koalas, and it also supports dozens of threatened woodland bird species, with the Regent Honeyeater acting as a flagship for all of those other species. So this map that I've got there, it's just showing even just between 2015 and 2018, you can see there was just such a large expanse of bushfires that had gone through here. Some of them were just, caused by lightning, just naturally had started. There is problems with arson being so close to residential areas, or just, cigarette butts, accidental fires, or, rubbish and tar dumping and things like that. Things catch fire in there and unfortunately burnt through large swathes of this habitat. But to show you on top of that, the little green dots there are Regent Honeyeater records. So you can see there between 1980 and 2021, we've had a lot more Regent Honeyeater records that we need to update on this from the past few years, but, quite sensitive to have these locations out there. But just to give you a quick idea, some really sort of large expanse of areas of where Regent Honeyeaters occur, but they're also quite selective. You can see there's kind of two main clusters of where they like to return to. So we sort of wanted to look into how much of that mistletoe resource had been lost. So we did some early baseline studies and unfortunately found that 90% of that mistletoe resource had been burnt. And what was left, the mistletoes, as Dave talked about, with the hot temperatures and that fire reaching right up into the canopy, the ones that were left weren't doing too well either. So there wasn't a lot we could do in the early stages, but thankfully, as we know, our eucalypt woodlands tend to regenerate quite well after fire. You can get a lot of that sort of initial woody regrowth, and it can be quite thick underneath, and this woodland is like that in places, but it's starting to sort itself out sort of 5 to 10 years down the track from these fires. And we were in a position again where we could go in and have a look and say, look, where could we reintroduce some mistletoe back into this woodland that was obviously occurring there because we could see all the dead clumps. So we said, look, it's really worth doing a project to test the theories and build on the work that Dave Watson had been doing as well, looking at taking mistletoe reintroduction from, a more sort of artificial habitat in the city with an exotic species like the plane tree, and see if we can just use it as a form of bush regen in a natural setting. So we had a phone chat with Dave Watson in the early days, and he suggested just, go for it. It's, it's quite easy to grow. It's just that it's a numbers game, which I'll explain later. So at this site, and I love that question about, birds breeding in mistletoe and making their nests. So I've got a photo here just showing like this is an active live nest of a regent honeyeater in a live long-flowered mistletoe clump. And you can even see some of the blossom there. So it's got its, nesting, its home, its little safe haven and foraging resources right beside where it's nesting. So it's kind of a plant that provides just so much all in one thing for regent honeyeaters. They'll even choose dead clumps sometimes to build a nest on because it makes such a stable platform for their nest. So as I said, that little, roughly where that star is where our project site is. And I'm just showing you on that map graphic there that the historic species range from the regent honeyeater once extended from much further up Queensland coastline right down into South Australia, but it's contracted a lot in recent years. In the last sort of 10 to 15 years, it's shrunk probably even further than this, unfortunately, and we've just got it sort of in southeast Queensland down into northeast Victoria. So this site is one of the key breeding sites for regent honeyeaters. There's only really this site in the Kapiti Valley, just on the western outskirts of the Blue Mountains. There also used to be, and I hope that has a reversal in the next couple of years, but there's Chiltern National Park. Many people might be familiar with that down in northeast Victoria, was also considered a key breeding area, but it really hasn't been for sort of the last 5 years. So we're hoping that there might be a bit of an uptick if we, bounce back after all the rain that we've had. But unfortunately, once mistletoe is lost through these severe fire events, it can take decades for it to naturally reseed, because as Dave was talking about, we have those natural dispersers of mistletoe, like the mistletoe bird and the painted honeyeater, but they don't frequent areas where they can't find fruit. So really what the aim of this sort of project is to be the mistletoe bird, put the resource back into the habitat, and then let them come and take over the job. That's, you've done a good job if after a few years you've reintroduced fruit back to this site, brought some of those birds back in, and then they'll start to spread it throughout the adjoining habitat. So I'll explain a little bit more about how we actually do that. So just very quickly, I just wanted to show you, you've seen lots of beautiful photos that Dave's presented, but this is one of the key species that regent honeyeaters rely on in the Hunter Valley, long-flowered mistletoe. And it's great because it flowers in spring, which is when they really need that sort of high sugar flow when they're raising their chicks. And then it generally fruits after in summer. So this one is, I think, a fantastic sort of ambassador for our Christmas traditions. If we could encourage a little bit more appreciation of our Australian mistletoe at Christmas time, this one is one that is actually fruiting and has those beautiful pink berries around that December, January time. And you generally get this one growing in Angophoras, callistemon species, Eucalyptus corymbia, like the spotted gums, and then Macadamia melaleuca. So there's some of the key hosts. And so this one is a good one if you have some grevilleas or melaleucas in your backyard. You can get it established on those fairly easily. And then I just want to share one other species that's really important to the regent honeyeater in the Kapiti Valley is needleleaf mistletoe. This one's a tricky one. It's got quite a widespread distribution where we have a lot of our casuarina species throughout sort of New South Wales into Queensland, and it's almost exclusively parasitic. And you can see that the leaves of that needleleaf mistletoe very closely mimic the leaves of the casuarina host. So yeah, I'm sure Dave could talk more about that too, but that is a factor of some mistletoes, is that they have a cryptic form that when they're not flowering, they can often blend in with their host. So lots of theories as to why that might be the case, but that's just showing the flowers and the fruit of needleleaf mistletoe. So I'm going to try to, I hope this video will work, and I just want to show you how the experts actually plant mistletoe, and then I'll show you how we have tried to do our best to replicate the efforts of mistletoe birds and painted honeyeaters. So we'll just play this little short clip. Yes, so mistletoe birds, tiny little native pollinator of our mistletoe, disperser of our mistletoe, and obviously, I think that they're the real superhero here of the bird world. They're doing the heavy lifting for us for mistletoe, and I just had a great little fact that is in Tim Lowe's book, Where Song Began, and apparently these little guys can actually poop out 66,000 seeds per hectare per season, which is I just find amazing. And I have often found long strings of seeds that have been pooped out by these birds in our project sites. And I think that's why, when we say it's a numbers game planting mistletoe, these guys are out there flying around doing it all day for us, wiping, doing that little bum shuffle on the little branch and getting it planted. So they're the real experts. You can see that painted honeyeater there is having a little bit of trouble. He's actually gotten it a bit stuck and is using its beak to kind of dislodge and then wipe. So yeah, they're out there all the time doing this amazing ecosystem service for us. So we were putting our thinking caps on and thought, how can we do it at least, slightly as effectively as mistletoe birds? Oh, look, I'll just have to click through. There we go. So as far as we know, this is a world first habitat restoration experiment that we embarked on. So in 2020, we started to get the project team together. We had local arborists, and more recently, Minderibba have formed an Indigenous ranger team, and they plant mistletoe each year out in these woodlands. And what we do is we actually either send arborists up into the canopy. So I've got the pictures of two of the arborists and their view back down to me. I'm actually a tiny little person there with a blue BirdLife shirt on, recording stuff on the clipboard that they yell down to me, and they take the mistletoe fruit up into the canopy and actually wipe it, originally where I was telling them, and then by the end they got so good that they were saying to me, look, I think this is a good spot, we're on the right side of the tree, and this is going to get some sun. And so yeah, by the end they developed such a great knowledge of where to place them. And then we've come back since and we've monitored them, so I'll give you a little bit of an update of where we're at with that. And then on the picture on the right, Joby Patton is Minderibba's head ranger, and he's now training the next sort of recruits to actually do this mistletoe planting work. I've had training sessions with Joby and other people within the Minderibba team, and as new rangers come on board, they're now passing these skills down to them. And this one of the other rangers there is actually using a pole method, and I can explain that a little bit more, but just putting the mistletoe seed on the end of a nailed into a pole, and using that to get the mistletoe seed a little bit higher up into the trees. So very non-technical way of doing it, and obviously a lot more cost effective than having to pay arborists to go up into the trees for us. So after these last few years of us being out there, we've planted 4,500 seeds of the long-flowered mistletoe. And very similar to Dave, we actually found in early days, we had about 12% germination rate, about sort of 12 to 18 months after we had gone back and we checked them. And then thankfully in years that have, more recent years, when we've gone back and we've employed the things that we've learned, we've actually raised that up to around 20% survival. And we've got 315 plants now established, and I'll be going back to check on those soon and just basically check longevity and see that we are actually getting plants survive 2-3 years down the track, because we know that we've actually had first flowers and fruits on those plants we've grown at about that 3-year mark. And I'll mention later that we've since published a mistletoe propagation manual to share what we've learnt. So very quickly here, just showing what a mistletoe looks like at the very early stages. So maybe only sort of a month after being planted, down to, 18 months later, still looking very healthy. And then I think it's interesting, by the 3rd year, we're getting the buds of first fruit, but we also have had a lot of insect activity on those leaves. It's not looking quite as glossy and healthy as it sort of was, but that's a good thing. Like, it means that insects have found this plant, and then I would hope that birds have started to find this plant once it starts to produce those beautiful flowers and fruit. So with everything that we learned, one of the key things was that we needed to share that knowledge more widely. So as I said, we've done the mistletoe planting training. They're in the Tamalpam woodlands on their lands with the Minderibba Ranger team. And we've talked about employing arborists to do it, about planting it by hand from ground level or with a step ladder. That's a way of doing it, or also using the pole method just to get a little bit higher up into the trees. It's been great. We've all been able to sort of problem solve, come up with different ways of doing it. And now the Minderibba team actually have a dedicated phone app that they use for monitoring. So we will have a consistent way of recording the planting and then monitoring into the future of this resource that we're putting back for the Regent Honeyeater. And obviously hoping when I go back this spring, summer, it'd be amazing if I was actually able to see a Regent Honeyeater out there in the area that we have planted these mistletoe plants. Or even I probably would be just as excited to see a mistletoe bird out there, because it means we've obviously got that disperser back into the landscape. So the propagation manual is available online. I know Shirali will send out the resource later as part of the information pack for people to find more resources if they want to learn more. It also has phenology charts for the 6 key species that occur within Eastern Australia. We've focused the guide because it's sort of woodland bird focused and helping to put this resource back. So 6 key species that most people who are watching tonight should be able to find within their local area, and then would have suitable host trees to plant into. So to give you a quick idea of how to grow it, and all this is in the propagation manual in a little bit more detail, but what you're after is sourcing ripe fruit, picking it with the stalk attached if you can, because that stops the oxygen getting into the fruit and starting the germination process. You might have a pruning tool that you can use if the mistletoe is up a bit high, or you might need to get a ladder and get a friend to help you and do it safely. And then once you've got your collection of fruit, you can store it in the fridge, and generally maybe just pop a bit of absorbent paper towel in there, and then you can usually leave it in your fridge in that little, maybe you could use like what you keep your blueberries in, or you get your strawberries in, that type of thing, a container, or into a Ziploc bag. Leave it there for a few days or weeks, just making sure it doesn't get too much moisture into the fruit, because they can go a bit moldy in the fridge. The next thing would be select a suitable host. So perhaps have a look at where you actually got the mistletoe fruit from, what host it was in. That would be a suitable host then to find somewhere else to plant into. But if you've got some exotics like crepe myrtles, liquid ambers, I'm just trying to think of other things that you could use. We can definitely get you some more information about that. But generally, if you've got grevilleas or melaleucas, those types of species, things like your needleleaf mistletoe, your long flowered and your box mistletoe would be good to try in there. Or if you've got the casuarina species, swamp oaks or river oaks on your property, you could try the needleleaf mistletoe in those. And then generally avoid very young trees. We don't want to sort of overstress very young trees, but still we were planting in some small spotted gums because they were thriving and healthy and had plenty of access to water, as Dave was mentioning. So you can get quite good growth in some of those young developing trees that still might be sort of like that 5 to 10 years old. It's really handy to have a step ladder or a pole, and I've even just had a umbrella in the back of my car and a step ladder, and if you find some fruit, you can maybe climb up and just give the clump a little bit of a bang, and the fruit will just fall to the ground. Sometimes you can just find fruit that's fallen out of the mistletoe clumps on the ground, and you can just collect it there. So probably ask around, talk to people that you know, and you'll find local collection locations that are accessible to you, that you can sort of get some fruit to get you started. And so it's quite easy to do. As we saw, the birds just have to eat it and poop it out for us. We just need to pop it out with our fingers, and it's got this sticky stuff, clear sticky liquid called viscin on it. And that actually is what is used to adhere it to the branch. So that's just a photo of me wiping it on the branch of a grevillea. And you're just looking for a branch that's not got really tough bark, that is only sort of pencil thickness, maybe even a bit thinner for the casuarinas. You can go even a bit thinner for those. So use the size of the seed as sort of a bit of a guide, match that to kind of the size of the branch that you're putting it onto. And I would just avoid your branch junctions and epicormic branches, those branches that resprout after fire but often die off within a year or two of, of them growing, because, yeah, you're going to lose that mistletoe seed. And it's really important if you're planting into things like spotted gum that shed their bark on an annual basis, just have a think about what bark you're putting it onto. We're putting it onto the white new bark there in that second photo, and very quickly an ant has found that they've got such a sugary sort of coating on them that lots of insects will come toward your seed. So as I said, it's a numbers game. You want to get lots of seeds out there because there are things that are going to pick off your sugary seed coatings and your developing leaves as they get started. And then an important thing is it's very easy to plant these things and think, oh, yeah, I'll remember where they are. So I would just really suggest that you probably won't remember. You'll come back and say, oh, I can't see it. Was it that branch or this branch? So in our projects, we use coloured marker, we put flagging tape or a spot of spray paint, and we mark the locations of the seed. So this is just showing roughly on a photo. That's the other thing is really helpful. Take a photo of your branch or your overall tree that you're planting into and mark the branches of where you've put it onto. If you're doing it a bit more systematically, if it's part of, say, a land care project, you might want to use a GPS or an app on your phone that you can actually mark the GPS location of the tree and take photos and do it in a systematic way. It would be really helpful then, especially to inform us of your efforts and what achievements you have. So Dave's rule of thumb, and one that sort of definitely sort of seems like that is what happens, is about 90% will actually germinate. So it's quite exciting. You'll see germination, but only about 10% of that 90% will go on to survive. So, we've had nearly 20% survival, so don't be disheartened, but it's just about collecting as much as you can, and it's quite a quick process to plant, so nowhere near as time-consuming as planting trees. So I just wanted to mention too that one thing that you can do to help us is log sightings on iNaturalist. So there's actually quite a few different groups springing up, which is amazing. So there's Mistletoes of Australasia is one that has the most observations that I could find. And you can create a free account for iNaturalist. I'm sure lots of people probably are already on there because you can log all different sorts of sightings. You can also go onto the web portal and see all these locations. So you can see where these 99 species of mistletoe have been found on a map. You can get information about each species, so species profiles, but what's really helpful is you can see phenology graphs for these species. So you can actually see the approximate time of the year when different species in your area will fruit and flower. So very useful thing to contribute because people like myself and Dave can actually look at this as a resource when we're planning future propagation projects. And then another one that's just in its very infancy is Australian mistletoe inoculation and cultivation. So this is actually for people like ourselves, citizen scientists and researchers who are doing these sorts of projects and are happy to share, approximate locations. If you can't put the exact location or you don't want to put your backyard, but you can give an approximate location of where you're doing your project, and you can then add photos to track your journey from planting through to hopefully successful growth of mistletoe plants. And that's going to really help people to learn about how individual species can be better propagated and, success rates, that type of thing. So just to wrap that all up, it's very hard to cover a lot of it in sort of 15 or 20 minutes, but we do have that mistletoe propagation guide available. There'll be a download link that'll be sent out so you can get that. And then I just wanted to sort of summarise Dave's talk and my talk just to say mistletoe really does matter. Far from it being a pest, it's that keystone species, it's supporting birds, insects, mammals, and it's just contributing amazing things to general woodland health. And, if you want sort of more proof, it's restoring mistletoe to help the decline of two of Australia's most threatened honeyeaters, the beautiful Regent honeyeater and the painted honeyeater. And just to leave you with that, we can hear some really bad news about the effects of our changing climate and fire and drought, but it is actually possible. I've seen lots of examples now and more are popping up of these sorts of projects that are putting mistletoe back where it's been lost and encouraging those mistletoe birds back to take over the job that they were doing beforehand. it's been an amazing project to work on from that collaboration side of things as well. I've really enjoyed looking, you know, from my science background, then looking toward the traditional knowledge side of things and working with Minjerribah, learning from them and appreciating just how much deep knowledge they have about their overall country, not, you know, not just about Regent Honeyeaters, from what we bring, and the community action has made it such an enjoyable project to be part of. And just to leave you with things that you can do, you know, if you want to get involved, download and share that mistletoe propagation manual with people that you know that might be interested, or maybe your local councils if perhaps they are actively out there removing mistletoe from street trees. And then, you know, if you've got local groups that you want to get involved with, or even just, you know, get the guide, get a bit of practice under your belt, and I think you'll find it's quite an enjoyable activity to do and something that you'll pick up quite quickly. So, yep, spread the word. Mistletoe is a friend to biodiversity, and I really have, you know, enjoyed working on this project, and I hope that you've gotten a lot out of the talk tonight. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for your time and all of the really interesting information that you've shared about mistletoe and the work that you both do. And yeah, it was just really interesting, and we're really grateful to have you guys doing this important work and sharing the work that you're doing. And also thank you for everyone who joined us. And it's really great to see so much interest in mistletoes, like in mistletoe in the community. And, you know, people wanting to learn about it, willing to dispel the myths, or, you know, hear about the truth behind mistletoe. So it's really lovely to see so many people here today with so much interest in mistletoe and the bigger, wider ecological connections that they're part of. And I've put in the chat, I've pinned in the chat a PDF of the mistletoe propagation manual. So you can find a PDF version of it there. And I've also written our Birds on Farms email address in the chat, which I'll find and pin in there as well. So you can always email us, because I don't think we'll have everyone's email addresses who are here. We just have our email list. So just send us an email if you want any more information, or a recording of this webinar. And lastly, for anyone here who is close to Yass or willing to make the drive, on the 20th of September, Paul and I will be running a mistletoe propagation workshop based of all of the, you know, knowledge that we've learned from David and Kristy over the past few months of conversations. So yeah, it will be a really nice day. We'll propagate some hopefully ripe mistletoe seeds and have some nice chats and have lunch and do a little planting afterward. So that's on the 20th of September. Yeah, so I'll put a couple of links in our chat, and it looks like there are some questions popping up. And so maybe if you guys want to take the next 10 minutes and try to answer as many as you can before we wrap up.
Yeah, sure. I just did see one that someone had asked me about planting on branch junctions, I think. And I just, look, that is just going off what we found with the spotted gum, because it sheds the bark annually. And we just really found that where we stuck it in the little branch junctions was a really high sort of probability area for it to crack the bark in those zones. And so when I went back, I often would get back and I would find my little seed still attached to the piece of bark, but the bark was no longer attached to the host. So it was just sort of sitting there waiting to be kind of blown out of the tree, and the seed had kind of dried up. And yeah, so, you know, look, that is not probably the case with, say, creeping mistletoe, Dave. I think that you can just pretty much wipe it on the trunk of the tree, from what I understand.
Yeah, that's right. It's that genus Muellerina. They predominantly grow on trunks, and that's why we used it for the Melbourne experiment, because you do get some premature branch fall with mistletoes that grow on branches, and with, you know, street trees and parked cars and pedestrians, we didn't want to go there. So we went for one that just goes on the trunks. But they did. I think one of the reasons they're so slow is it takes them a while to penetrate through that bark and into the tissue. But they move. They move. That they have multiple attachment points, and so they can't get outshaded, because as a branch grows, they just move around the tree and grow towards the lights. So pretty crafty.
It's amazing. It's very cool. Yes. Oh, now let's see if we can find any others. You answered the one about digestion with mistletoe birds.
I tried to go through them while you were doing your thing, but please sing out if there's a question that has gone unanswered. We're here. We're happy to dive in. I think we're caught up.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I'll just have to say from our experience too is that we definitely noticed that we, so on a couple of branches, I sort of whacked a couple of seeds on one branch, and I got really excited in the initial stages because I would go back and there'd be 2 healthy mistletoe growing on that branch for a while, and then they got bigger and they got bigger, and then, you know, say the next year I went back, one of them had actually fallen off. The most distal one had just gotten too heavy and it broke off. So that's going to happen too, but, you know, as we say, you're increasing your chances. Try to get, we didn't really cover off too, is that you can, in a healthy tree, you could probably put 20 to 30 seeds in there. If you're talking about only having a 20% success rate, you know, it's not going to be that you're going to get 20 or 30 overloading that poor tree and causing that burden. You're only going to get a couple that are actually going to survive to maturity. And that's all you really need. That's all you really want to get. So, yeah.
I just spotted a question from Ross Drew that I didn't answer. Let me just dive in there. He says that we're keen to improve the species diversity on our bush block, mixed riverine, shrubby foothill eucalypt forests, regenerating after Ash Wednesday back in '83, and regular burning by CFA. Would re-adding any species of mistletoe be likely to enrich the ecology? How would we find out which ones to add? So, yeah, the mistletoe propagation manual, I think, is your best bet there, Ross. That'll give you information on really the nuts and bolts of how to go about doing it. In terms of which species, there'd be a few around there. There'd be box mistletoe, drooping mistletoe, grey mistletoe, Ami McQuandang that grows on acacias. Those 3 are pretty widespread in that part of the world. But what I'd do is just hunt around, just in your area, and this isn't just Ross, but anybody who's thinking, hey, I want to do this. If you want to get some mistletoes going on your place, just become a sticky beak. Just look around and just see which ones are growing. Try and work out which ones they are. They're pretty easy to ID if you've got flowers. Without flowers, it can be tricky. But what it's growing on, what does it look like? What do the flowers look like? And then just keep an eye on it. And when you've got ripe fruit there, grab a few and just wipe them on a few hosts, following the directions in that manual. But the manual might seem a bit sketchy. That's the best information we have. The best minds who've thought about this more than anybody were involved in putting that together. Peter Vaughan, Kristy mentioned, has been doing this for decades at his place. But there's a lot we don't know. So if you want to get involved in this stuff, keep in touch with us. And if you're trying different things, you've had some successes, you've had just abject failures, share your findings, and together we'll get better.
Exactly. That's what I'd love to hope, is that that mistletoe propagation manual will one day feature, 90 odd mistletoes that you can propagate potentially.
Dare to dream. Love it.
Yeah.
We have a question. In what month are seeds ripe?
Depends on the species. So most of the arid zone species, they're winter fruiters, whereas more of the temperate species are summer fruiters. They've got this really fun pattern of complementary phenology, where mistletoe fruit and flowers will be available when regionally, there's almost no other fruit and no other flower nectar available because mistletoes are so flexible, because they're not governed by how many nutrients that they can get out of the soil. But generally speaking, there's at least one species of mistletoe in flower and in fruit in most regions of Australia in most months. Now, I saw Richard Loyne there briefly.
Yeah, go ahead. I've given you microphone.
Thank you. And look, I was just going to raise one of the issues we have near Beechworth, where we have lots of painted honeyeaters in the spring. And there's lots of grey mistletoe growing on the silver wattles, but an awful lot of landowners are not very fond of silver wattles. So it's not mistletoes that have the bad press, it's the wattles. And you can understand it when you see a paddock that's absolutely full of wattles. That's no good if you're trying to. But how do we communicate better with local councils and the people who are often doing the wattle clearing? That's undoubtedly reducing the habitat for this quite rare bird that has a very substantial population in our area.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking, Richard. I think we are part of the solution. Exactly what we're doing here, spreading the understanding, raising the awareness, more broadly. And I think, as with so many of the challenges in the environmental space, sometimes you just have to wait for generational change, sometimes for that misinformation to sort of effectively die out. But even amongst arborists, I'm seeing real changes where 10, 15 years ago, it was just best practice to, see a dead branch, cut off a dead branch, see a mistletoe, cut off a mistletoe. And now they're being taught, at TAFE and at other, institutes, they're being taught, no, mistletoe is actually a good thing, and hollows are good things, and here's how you can put a hollow in a tree. So I think I'd urge everyone who's still here to spread, infect others with your knowledge. And when you see that sort of thing going on, when you see an arborist, lopping off branches, or a neighbour who's grizzling about those ghastly wattles, step up to the plate, challenge them and say, well, did you know that beautiful little bird there going, it's on its knees, it's almost extinct, and it needs the mistletoe. So yeah, it's a fight we're all involved in.
Thanks, Dave, and we have to do it pragmatically too, because we have to recognise that some people have legitimate things that they need to do. But I'm with you completely, and thanks very much, you and Kristy, for a fantastic talk tonight, and Shirley too. It was
Pleasure.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we've got how important is provenance? That's an interesting one, Dave. I think just to nearly wrap that one up. But yeah, provenance is certainly great if you can collect locally. That's what we've tried to do with our project with longflower mistletoe. Thankfully, we've had quite a lot of plants nearby that were accessible to us to collect from within about 5 to 10 kilometres of our project site. Sometimes we were able to actually collect from quite nearby on other Minjerribah lands that weren't burnt as part of that sort of map that I showed you earlier. But look, really within your local area, I would say, maybe up to sort of around that 50 kilometre mark, I suppose, Dave. Is that what you would roughly?
Yeah, I'd go along with that. There's some unpublished data from both Australia and New Zealand showing that the further you go from the source of the mistletoe seed to where you're planting it, the lower the success rate. The data's not great. Which is, I think, part of the reason it's not published. But there seems to be a trend there that local mistletoes do tend. It's like they've sort of foiled the defences of the trees locally, and that sort of breaks down over longer distances. But I would also say that there's no evidence that a mistletoe growing on a yellow box, that those seeds will grow better on yellow box. There's no evidence for that at all. So as long as you've got the right seeds from the right plant, plonk it on anything you want, and be adventurous. I mean, there's been a few questions about, exotics. Many native mistletoes will do just fine on exotic trees. It's not just the plain tree that's the weird one there. Willows, citrus, nut trees, fruit trees, all sorts of things will host mistletoes. So if you just want to have a bit of fun in your garden, give it a try.
Yep. I would definitely say that as well, in terms of just on any type of grevillea, doesn't matter what it was. If it's one that you got at Bunnings and it's something that probably actually grows in WA or things like that, or a completely different area to you. I've had success here in my own garden, and I've had black Jezebel butterflies lay eggs on the mistletoe, and it showed that process perfectly of where I had really healthy mistletoe plant at Christmas time hanging down over our pool fence, and then had all of the of the caterpillars hatch, and they quickly defoliated that plant. So they were doing the natural, keeping that plant in balance in my yard. So, and that's just been, I've been lucky. I've got mistletoe birds here in our property, but I'm sure that I could have probably got it to grow quite easily myself as well. Yeah.
And Janet, no, I'm not aware of records of mistletoes on olives. There might be.
I can actually tell you that, yes, that I have them on olive trees at my house.
There you go. I love being wrong. Awesome.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about olives. Yeah. And there's some cases in the Lower Hunter Valley of vignerons that also have olive groves nearby, potentially saying that long-flowered mistletoe is a problem on their olive groves, or seeing them as a problem in their olive groves.
Oh, cool.
So, yes.
It's a nice problem to have.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question about seedling penetrating, yes, it's mostly mechanical. It's a bit like how a fruiting body of a fungus comes through a road. It's just through hydrostatic pressure. There are enzymes involved. They will soften the bark as they go through, and depending on the mistletoe species, that can be quite specific to one group of plants or quite broad. But there's some Indian anatomical research that was done on that in the 80s, and that remains the best embryological work done on mistletoes. So, microscopy has advanced since then. A lot of chemical ecology methods have advanced since then, and no one's really looked at that more in detail. And I think there's all sorts of chemical ecology going on in that space that might explain why some trees, there's a few trees in Australian natives, just don't get mistletoes. And one that's familiar to many in the arid zone is Gidgee, Acacia cambagii, large, bulky acacia. It almost never gets mistletoes. And we're completely fine with plants having all sorts of chemical adaptations to deter herbivores. With 65 million years of shared evolution, I think it's reasonable to suspect that there could be some chemicals there in bark and on the trunks of trees that inhibit or retard germination of mistletoes. But again, completely unstudied. There's so much work to be done.
Amazing. I think we've covered all of the questions, have we?
I think so.
Yeah. Maybe I missed you guys answering this one. We live near the Grampians. How far into the burnt areas can mistletoe birds be expected to spread mistletoe each year? Did you get that one?
No, haven't seen that one. And that's I wouldn't be too worried about that. I mean, fire is part of the Australian landscape. Fires aren't a new thing. We're certainly seeing more catastrophic fires, more intense fires, no doubt about it. And it will take a while for them to come back, but I wouldn't worry about it. And mistletoe birds probably aren't the birds that are moving them into new areas. So we've done some work on that, showing that mistletoe birds only go to areas where there's existing mistletoe. That's all they eat is mistletoe fruit. And so it's things like orioles, silver eyes, some of the other honeyeaters. So singing honeyeater, spiny-cheeked honeyeater, they're pretty important mistletoe dispersers as well, but they eat other things. And so those are the agents of colonizing new areas. So I wouldn't be too worried about a fire's come through, all the mistletoes are gone. They'll come back in their own sweet time. It might take 10, 15 years, but they'll find their way.
Great. I think that was all of the questions, and just 5 minutes over. Thanks for everyone who stayed to hear all the answers is really interesting. And thanks, David and Kristy, for answering them so well and thoroughly. Yeah, lots to learn. And I just made one last little note there. Anyone coming to the in-person workshop, please bring along fruit, any mistletoe fruit. If you see some on your property, leave a couple of leaves on there so we can try to figure out what species it is. But yeah, that would be great. We can do a little trade. You can increase diversity, genetic diversity, if you trade with your neighbors. So, and yeah, thanks again, you guys. This was wonderful. I think very
Pleasure.
informative.
Great
No
questions.
problem.
Thanks
Thanks
very
for coming
much,
on.
David. Thanks, Kristy. Really,
Okay.
really interesting. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Bye.
everyone.
thank you.
Thanks. See you later. Bye.